Hey, it's NPR's Book of the Day. I'm Andrew Limbong. Transracial adoption is one of those topics where you kind of hope for a nice and neat storybook ending, but that's rarely what ends up happening. Journalist Erika Hayasaki probably knows that better than most. She's got a new nonfiction book out called Somewhere Sisters. In it, she tells the story of three women, two of whom are twin sisters, who take different routes to end up in the care of an affluent white family just outside of Chicago. Now, families adopting kids from so called developing countries can often be seen as well intentioned. But Hayasaki tells Here and Now's Deepa Fernandez that adoption doesn't necessarily give you a better life, just a different one.
A new book probes the difficulties of transracial adoption as seen through the eyes of identical twin girls born in Vietnam in the late 1990s. One twin was adopted by a white American couple, the Solomonis. They named her Isabella. The other twin was brought up by her maternal aunt in Vietnam, whose partner named her Ha. Ha and Isabella were eventually reunited in the United States, but struggled to feel a connection, having led such different lives. Journalist and professor Erika Hayasaki followed Isabella, Ha, and Isabella's adopted sister Olivia for 5 years. She tells their story in the new book Somewhere Sisters, and she joins us now to talk about it. Erika, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
You know, it's a fascinating story as it really takes on the eternal question of nature nurture. Describe how each girl was raised.
Yeah, so they were born in Vietnam, and Isabella grew up in a suburb of Chicago in a wealthier white family, along with her adopted sister, Olivia. They grew up, in this loving home with a lot of privilege and also struggles at times dealing with identity and racial issues. Ha grew up in a village in Vietnam raised by two women, one of whom was her aunt. They raised her in an area that didn't have a lot of electricity, or electricity was sporadic. There were storms at times that destroyed the villages. She lived a simple life, but didn't really know that she was poor because she never went without food, and she had a loving home as well. But the two of them, they grew up on opposite ends of the world.
I felt like this story that you're telling, Erica, was such a page turner because even if you've never thought about nature nurture, you really want to find out, did these girls reunite? Because she was taken, Isabella was taken to America and raised, as you said, in this affluent suburb. Yet her mother, her adoptive mother, really, when she found out there was another twin, she really wanted to reunite these girls. And she began this
Mhm,
mission to reunite these girls. And I think
mhm,
every part of me wanted it to be that like glorious
mhm.
reunion.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is an interesting point here because we think about reunions and twins being reunited in adoption, sometimes in this fairy tale narrative. But certainly, this mother, Keely, took it upon herself to try to bring these girls together. And what everyone, I think, learned along the way, and I also learned while reporting this, is that the process of reunion in adoption can be particularly painful and traumatic even, and bringing in, constellations of family members from around the world that went beyond the two girls, birth families and grandmothers. And so it was much more complex and not this sort of linear narrative of, reunion and then everybody lives happily ever after.
Mm. You know, in some ways, I felt like it almost feels like fiction because there were so many variables that got thrown into this story that, not just from the polar opposite upbringings, but during the reunion process, the well-meaning Americans who are now trying to bring the other daughter, take her from her Vietnamese family and give her opportunities in America. It ends up happening. And
Mhm.
we don't know how it'll end because it's playing out in real life. But I wonder if there were, you talked to all these people in the story for years. Was there
Mhm.
ever a moment where they had the Solomini family maybe had second thoughts of like maybe this other twin would be better off left with her family in Vietnam.
There is a moment in the book with the adoptive mother because she does meet Ha's adoptive mothers in Vietnam before the reunion ever happens between the twins. And she goes to this village and kind of anticipates that she would maybe bring this twin back to the US and they would live together happily ever after, and then realized how loving this family was that was raising the twin, and how painful that would be for this family. And I think kind of backed off for a while. What happens with Ha is that she, at one point, decides for herself when she, is kind of understanding what it means for her to reunite with her sister or to try to get an education, for example, in the US, and starts to begin to fight for that for herself. So it's also a very interesting dynamic and moment.
It's also super fascinating to me the moment when Ha is in the United States and she's reunited with her twin sister, and she gets thrown into her twin sister's life. So she's attending the white Catholic school and exposed to her soccer playing sisters. And then she begins to realize that they're bullied. Life is not all beautiful for them and that they're struggling with a lot of things based on their identity. Yet it was never conceived that Isabella or her sister Olivia, who's also adopted from Vietnam, might ever go the other way and go to Vietnam, right? It was always this one-way street of come from Vietnam
Right.
to the United States.
Yeah, and that is such a, it was such an interesting moment for her to finally grow close to her sisters. She considers both Olivia and Isabella to be incredibly close to her as sisters. But yeah, to have these moments of realization when they would finally bond and talk, and those bonding moments, which are quite moving, are around sharing their kind of experiences of bullying, and and for Isabella too, her upbringing sometimes that was challenging in certain ways. And there's even a moment, because the story goes on into even a pandemic and anti-Asian hate incidents that were happening, which even happened with the twins walking down the street one day in Chicago, and they were verbally assaulted for being Asian. And, Isabella felt this need to protect this sister who had never been exposed to that in Vietnam, and it was one of these moments that's quite emotional, hit home for me. And I think for a lot of people, this realization that life is hard here too, even with privilege and money. And, certainly these issues around identity are challenging.
How are they connected to their families in Vietnam today?
They are very close to Ro and Thuy, the couple that raised Ha, incredibly close. And their birth mother is still in the picture. It has been definitely a more complicated relationship, and some of that has come down also to, challenges with money, for example.
And one of the
And
saddest parts that we learn early in the book is that their birth mother, Lean, gave them away because of poverty, because she just didn't have the money to buy food and milk to raise them. But I wonder, what lessons do you take away from it? Are both of these girls better off? Or maybe, it had me thinking, should the Solimini family have given Lean some money, all the money that they would take to raise this girl, and have let her stay in Vietnam and be raised by her family?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard for, I think, all of us to think of, if I could rewind and go back and do all these things differently, would everything happen in a different way? One quote that stands out for me from adoptees that I've interviewed for this book is that adoption doesn't give you necessarily a better life, but it does give you a different life. The hope is that with this book, all of that complexity is something that you'll really be thinking about for a while and questioning and considering, the different ways that your life could go. But, that's one of the themes of the book, I guess I should say, is nature and nurture have often been, is it the environment or is it your genes that make us who we are? And that's been this ongoing battle through history of science. We swing back and forth, nature, nurture, nature, nurture. What I've learned in the research is that, it's a combination of both. There's an interplay between the environment and genes. And that's not so simple, just like many of the stories in this book. Nothing is simple. It's not black or white. It's nuanced and complex. And so I hope through reading it, people understand that.
Erika Hayasaki is the author of Somewhere Sisters, a story of adoption, identity, and the meaning of family. Erika Hayasaki, thank you.
Thank you so much.
To read an excerpt, go to hereandnow.org.